All right, so today I'm going to teach y'all how to do the quadratic formula. You have learned this before. This is not the first time. You learned it in Algebra 1. You probably learned it in geometry. And you learned it in Algebra 2. And I believe we've even mentioned it in this class this year. This is one of those things that even when you go off to college, you're going to see this again. Okay? You know how like we've spent a lot of time on factoring quadratics, right? But not every quadratic is factorable. Okay? So if you have to solve a quadratic and you can't solve it by factoring, then we need another method. Okay? Because every quadratic we can solve it. It might not have real solutions, but you just can't always solve it by factoring. So again, we've spent a lot of time learning how to solve by factoring. Today I'm going to show you what to do if you can't solve by factoring. It's called the quadratic formula. Okay? There are several steps to the quadratic formula, but it's not difficult. Just pay attention to the steps that I show you each time, and you're going to be all good. All right? So, example 1. We're going to solve 6x squared minus 7x minus 11 equals 0. Now, if I wanted to solve by factoring, I would need two numbers that multiply together to get negative 66 and add to get negative 7. Now, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I don't think there's two numbers that you could multiply together to get negative 66 and add to get negative 7. Can y'all think of any? We got 11 and 6, or some combination of 11 and 6. That's not going to work for negative 7, right? 33 and 2. To multiply, not going to be able to add. Can you think of any other factors of 66? Not off the top of my head. Okay. 20 what? 66 divided by 22 and 3. Will any combination add to get negative 7? No, I can't think of any others. Okay. Well, I still need to solve it, and it's a quadratic. I can't solve it by factoring. So, quadratic formula it is. When you're using the quadratic formula, you want to, the first thing you always want to do, set equal to 0 and in standard form, which standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, if not already. Now, in this case, we can see it's set equal to 0. Is it in standard form? Yes, no, maybe. Is it in standard form? Your quadratic term comes first. Quadratic means it has 2 degrees. Our quadratic term came first, right? Your linear term is next. Linear means your variable's exponent is a 1. Yes, we're good. C is the constant. Constant's the number that doesn't have a variable. Our number that doesn't have a variable is last, the way it should be. Now, sometimes you won't have a linear term or you won't have a constant, and that's okay. Okay, those values would be 0. But to be a quadratic, your highest degree has to be a 2 to be considered a quadratic. Okay? All right, we're already in standard form, set equal to 0. We're good to go. So, next thing you want to do, usually if we're factoring, we look for a greatest common factor. You don't do that in quadratic formula. There's a GCF, we don't care. Okay? It stays. So, next thing you do, we're going to define A, B, and C just like we do when we factor. So what is A equal to? 6. What is B equal to? And what is C equal to? negative 11. Okay. So that is similar to factoring, but we're not factoring. We're using the quadratic formula. Does anybody remember what the quadratic formula is? All right, well, I'll remind you. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yeah. I don't sound like that? Oh, I know, it's my own version. I took it and I made it my own. Yeah, I don't go to the row, row, row your boat. So do y'all remember that formula? So a lot of times I've had kids tell me they go off to college, and when you're in college, you're going to do the quadratic formula, but your teacher's not going to give it to you on a test. You have to memorize it. And a lot of the kids have a hard time memorizing it. But then my former students will teach them the song, and then they got it, right? And I'm sure y'all learned the song before too in other classes. Yeah. No? Really? Well, I have my own version, as you can clearly hear if you've learned it before. But hopefully by the time we're finished today, you'll have this formula memorized, right? You never know. All right, so we're going to take these values for A, B, and C. You can see in the formula, we've got A, B's, and C's in there. We're going to substitute them in, and then we're just going to simplify using order of operations. Y'all down with that? There's nothing to plug in for X. That's what you're solving for, okay? X equals. On this first one, we're going to go like super slow. Here's the part where kids mess up. They're like, it says minus B. Well, B's already negative, so I'm just going to throw in a negative 7. No, this means subtract whatever B is. So I'm subtracting a negative 7. You don't say, well, there's already one there, so I don't have to put another one, okay? The way I think about it is, I look at this as opposite of B. So if B is a negative 7, it's going to turn positive. If B is positive 7, it's going to turn negative, okay? And then I plus or minus the square root of B squared. Now, I use parentheses there. Whatever B is, you're going to square it. In this case, B is a negative 7. You're squaring the negative sign and the 7. Whenever you do B squared, it's always going to be positive. Then the formula says to subtract 4AC. That means 4 times A, which is 6, times C, which is negative 11. All over 2 times 6. Julio? So we plugged everything in. Now we just have to be careful with our order of operations. So we have X equals, what do I get when I have a negative times a negative? Positive. So I'm going to simplify that to be positive 7. Plus or minus. That means we're going to have 2 answers, because I'm going to take the positive square root and I'm going to take the negative square root, but we'll deal with that later. The square root of, all right, inside or under the radical, be careful. Do the B squared first. What is negative 7 times negative 7? No. Negative 7 times negative 7. And it's positive, right? So positive 49. Okay, listen to me. Do the minus 4AC part all together, even the minus sign. Multiply all of that together. Whatever the sign is, that's the sign you're going to put here, okay? So let me show my work on the side. I'm going to do a negative 4 times a positive 6 times a negative 11. Y'all down with that? So negative 4 times 6 equals negative 24 times negative 11. That gives me a positive 264. I know the formula said to subtract, but I took that negative already and multiplied it by a positive times a negative, and it turned into a positive. So I'm going to end up adding 264. A lot of kids make a mistake there because they subtract no matter what. They always subtract. Well, sometimes that negative is going to turn into a positive. Sometimes it'll say a negative. So be careful about that. All over, another place kids make mistake is they just put the radical in the fraction, and the whole thing, this whole thing that we've written so far is in the numerator. Don't forget the denominator. 2 times 8, in this case, that's 2 times 12. Nope. But we're closer. Whoa. Okay, can we still simplify under that radical a little bit? Can we add 49 and 264? Yeah. All right, so we have x equals 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 264 equals 313. All over 12. Now, sometimes you'll see your answer left like this, okay? If you can simplify that radical, you need to simplify it. But what we're doing is we're just going to turn these into decimals because I'm going to teach you how to graph quadratics next. And the solutions to your quadratic equation, that tells you where the graph crosses the x-axis. So we're going to turn them into decimals, okay? Now listen to me. You can either go ahead and turn square root of 13 into a decimal. You can do it now, or you can do it in the next step. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to go ahead and do it now. So 313, the square root of that is, let's go with 17.69. We'll round to the nearest hundredths place, okay? I just put it in the calculator. 313 square root right here. That means that number times itself gives me 313, okay? So let's rewrite it. X equals 7 plus or minus 17.69. We know the correct way to say that is 17 and 69 hundredths all over 12. Now, I told you you're going to have 2 answers because one of your answers is going to be based on the positive square root, which was positive 17.69. Your other answer is going to be based on the negative square root, which is negative 17.69. Okay? So once you get to this point, we're going to rewrite this as 2 separate problems. Y'all with me? One of your problems is going to be x equals 7 plus 17.69 divided by 12. I'm taking the positive square root into account. Your other problem is going to be based on the negative square root. So we're going to do x equals 7 minus 17.69 quantity divided by 12. Could I simplify this further? Yeah, because can't I do 17 plus 17.69 and then divide it by 12? Sure. You can do this in your calculator all at once, but you have to be careful. If you just put 7 plus 17.69 divided by 12, that's going to give you the wrong answer because it's going to do 17.69 divided by 12, not 7 plus. It's going to do the order in which you enter it. So if you choose to do it all together at one time, I would do 7 plus 17.69 equals, and then divide by 12. Don't try to put it all in there at once unless you know how to use parentheses properly, okay? Otherwise, you're going to get the wrong answer. So do 7 plus 17.69 equals 24.69 divided by 12. Then I can just leave that in my calculator. 24.69 divided by 12 equals, I'm going to go with approximately let's round to the nearest hundredths, 2.06. That's one of my solutions. So when we learn how to graph these later, that's where my graph is going to cross the x-axis. One of the places it's going to cross the x-axis. Now let's find what we get when we take the negative square root, okay? So I'm going to do 7 minus 17.69. 7 minus 17.69 equals negative 10.69. And then I'll divide that by 12. Negative 10.69 divided by 12 equals, and I'm going to do approximate because I've been rounding. Rounded to the nearest hundredths is negative 0.89. So that's the other place my graph would cross the x-axis. Julio? Questions on that one? Y'all remember doing this in previous classes now? No? Yes? No? Some yes? Some no? You've done it before for sure. All right, is anybody still copying? Have a question before we move on to the next one? Again, y'all are going to have to do this on your own, so your notes are important. How about r squared minus 9r minus 52 equals 0? Is this set equal to 0 and in standard form? Yeah, okay. We're going to solve it. It's a quadratic. I could try to factor. Maybe it's factorable, maybe it's not, but we're going to use quadratic formula. Either way, okay? So again, with the quadratic formula, if there's a GCF, which there's not, but if there was, you don't take it out, you just leave it where it is, okay? So what is A equal to? 1. What is B equal to? Negative 9. What is C equal to? Negative 52. We're going to take those values and substitute them in to the quadratic formula. Tiana, would you like to sing the quadratic formula? No. Anyone want to sing the quadratic formula? No. Okay, well then I'll do it. You'll learn it by the time we're finished. X equals negative B plus or minus squared root. And you got to make that sound as terrible as you can. Root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And I like to throw in a yeah. Yeah is not part of the equation. Y'all seem so unamused by my singing. That's okay. I entertain myself. Okay. So we're going to take those values for A, B, and C, substitute them in. Y'all ready? All right. Good? Okay. So we don't substitute anything in for X. That's what we're solving for. We want to know what is X equal to. All right. So the formula says we subtract whatever B is. So we're subtracting what? What's B? Negative 9. So we have a double negative. We don't just get rid of one because there's already one there, okay? You're going to have a double negative. Plus or minus the square root of B squared. So use parentheses. You're not just squaring the 9, you're also squaring the negative sign. The formula says to subtract 4. It's always subtract 4AC, okay? That 4 is always going to be there. So negative 4 times A is 1 times C is negative 52. All over, the whole thing's over, not the X, everything else, everything on the right, 2A. So 2 times 1. Any questions so far? All right, so it looks kind of crazy right now, but that's all right. We can simplify this. X equals, what's going to happen with that double negative? turns positive. You're not always going to have a double negative, okay? But if you do, change this to a positive. Plus or minus the square root of, do your b squared first. What is negative 9 times negative 9? That's what you do when you square it. 81, and that's positive, right? Whenever you square a positive, you get a positive. When you square a negative, you get a positive. So b squared, you're always going to get a positive number. If you put a negative number, you didn't do it right. So be careful about that. Because some calculators, if you don't use parentheses, it's going to tell you it's negative 81. You're like, well, that's what the calculator said. Well, the calculator just solved what you told it to. If you didn't do parentheses, it only squared the 9, not the negative. Do the minus 4ac all together. Notice my color coding. I'm showing you how I got what. So first of all, a negative times a negative is going to give you what? Positive or negative? A negative times a positive is a negative, times a negative is a positive. So I know I'm going to be adding. So 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 52 is 208. All over, 2 times 1 is 2. And we don't stop until we have 2 answers. No radicals, no fractions, just their decimals. All right, so let's simplify what's under that radical. We have x equals 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 plus 208 is 289 all over 2. Right on? Now what do we do? Find the square root of 289. If you want to make 2 separate equations now, you can, or I like to just go ahead and figure out what the square root is. So I already had 289 in my calculator. The square root is 17. It's not a decimal. That means 289 is a perfect square, okay? So I'm going to rewrite this as x equals 9 plus or minus 17 all over 2. Is that my final answer? Can I simplify this more? Totally simplify it. I need 2 separate answers. This is your 2 answers combined as 1, okay? So once you get to this point, make 2 separate equations. One equation is going to be based on positive 17, and the other equation is going to be based on negative 17. That's the only sign you change. Don't change the sign of any other number, okay? So I'm going to have x equals 9 plus 17 quantity divided by 2. And I'm going to have x equals 9 minus 17 quantity divided by 2. Y'all cool with that? Now just simplify. So 9 plus 17. 9 plus 17 is 26. And then what's 26 divided by 2? 13. So that's one of my answers. This one didn't have a decimal. If we don't have decimals in our answers, we know we could have solved by factoring. Okay, but that's not what we're doing here. We're doing quadratic formula. On the other one, we do 9 minus 17, and that gives us negative 8. And then negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Every once in a while you'll have one answer, and that happens when what's under the radical is a 0, because the square root of 0 is 0. So if I have 9 plus 0 or 9 minus 0, isn't that just 9, right? But as long as the number under the radical is not a 0, then you'll have 2 separate answers. Coolio? All right, let's do 1 or 2 more, and then I'll give you your problems to do on your own. Any questions on this one? I do. Sure. welcome. Let's solve 10x squared minus 4 equals 0. We're going to solve by factoring, so I don't care that there's a GCF of 2 in these two terms, okay? It's a quadratic. Quadratic means 2 degrees, and I'm solving using the quadratic formula. What is A equal to in this case? 10. What is B equal to? What? No, there's no B. What is the -4? That's your C. It doesn't have a variable. That means it's C. C always comes last, okay? Remember, your standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. A is the coefficient of the term that's squared. So that's A is 10. B is the coefficient of your linear term. That's the term with the variable just raised to the first power. If you don't have one of those, then B is 0, because we wouldn't write plus 0x, right? But there is that's what it is, but 0 times x is just 0. C is always the constant. Constant is a number without a variable. You can be missing the constant too. C could be 0. So be careful. If you're missing a term, whatever the term is that you're missing is a 0. All right. We're going to use the quadratic formula. X equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yeah. All right, so let's see, what do we have? X equals, I subtract whatever b is. What is b? B is what? 0. Which really 0 is not positive or negative, but I just put what the formula said. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's 0 squared minus 4 times a is 10 times c is -4 all over 2a. So that's 2 times 10. We good with that? Okay, okay. So that's x equals, do I need to put -0 plus or minus? No, I'm going to put 0 plus or minus. It's not necessary, but I don't want you to be confused, okay? The square root of, what is 0 squared? 0. 0 times 0 is 0. Let's do the minus 4ac all together. A lot of kids want to go, okay, well, 0 minus 4 is -4, and then they'll multiply. Don't do that. You have to do the multiplication first before subtraction. All right, let's figure out what the sign is going to be. What is a negative times a positive times a negative? Positive. Just because all 3 examples that we've had have all turned to positive, that doesn't mean that they always turn to positive. You're going to get a negative just as often as you'll get a positive. It's just been coincidence. So then we know it's going to be plus, so I'm not going to worry about my signs. What's 4 times 10? What's 40 times 4? 160, right? We do it in our calculator. We have -4 times 10 times -4. Oops, I did something wrong. -4 times 10 times -4 is positive 160. All over 20. Again, I don't need that 0, but I'm going to put it just so we don't get confused. X equals 0 plus or minus the square root of. What's 0 plus 160? 160. All over 20. Now what? Now what? Square root. And how do we do that? Very good. Take the square root in the calculator. Again, let me explain one more time. A lot of times your teachers are going to want exact answers. If they want exact, then you don't use a calculator unless it's a perfect square. They want to see the radical left in your answer if it's not a perfect square. Okay, so, but for our purposes, we're doing this so I can teach you how to graph quadratics. And when we're graphing, I want the rounded version because I want to see where it's going to cross the x-axis. And if I leave it as a radical, that's a little bit harder to tell where it crosses the x-axis, okay? So we're doing the approximate answers to get a decimal. If we want exact, we need to simplify the radical. We're not getting into that. All right, so square root of 160 is, let's round to the nearest hundredths place. What would that be rounded to the nearest hundredths place? 12 point what? 12 point. Okay, so which number is in the hundredths place? 4. So 4 is in the hundredths place. Am I going to keep a 4 or am I going to round up to a 5? Up to a 5, because you look at the number to the right. If it's 5 or above, you round up. If it's 0 through 4, it stays the same, right? So rounded to the nearest hundredths place, that's going to be 12.65. So x equals 0 plus or minus 12.65, quantity divided by 20. Again, y'all realize I don't need that 0, right? I just keep bringing it down because I don't want to confuse you, but it's not necessary. Is that my answer? No. What do I got to do? 2 separate equations. One of them is going to be based on the positive 12.65. One of them is going to be based on negative 12.65. So x equals 0 plus 12.65 divided by 20. And x equals 0 minus 12.65 quantity divided by 20. So I'm going to have a positive solution and a negative solution. Is everybody cool with that? So let's do 0 plus 12.65 is just positive 12.65 divided by 20. I didn't need to do that in my calculator. I can do that in my head. So 12.65 divided by 20, I'm going to get, we round to the nearest hundredths place, what would that be? 0.63. And I'm going to do the little squiggles because that's approximate. I rounded. The squiggly equal signs being approximately, and I should have really put them here too because I was rounding. And then I have 0 minus 12.65, that's negative 12.65 divided by 20. So 12.65, make it negative, divide that by 20, and we get x is approximately negative 0.63. Because it's approximate, I rounded. So if I round, it's not exact. So a little squigglies mean approximate. Am I going to count it wrong? No, but you should if it's not. If you round it, you should always put that. It's not exact. Y'all cool? I mean, I know you're cool, but you want to try the next one on your own before I give you an assignment? Okay. Or do we need to do one more together and then try one on your own? Try one on your own? Okay. Can we what? Oh, no. Now you try. Let's do, we're going to solve 4x squared minus 6x minus 21 equals 0. So I'm going to freeze my screen, and I'm going to work it out while you work it out, and then we'll come back and we'll compare answers. Okay? Jonathan? Work it out. Oh, work it out. Oh, work it out. And then we'll compare answers. So we're not factoring, we're doing a quadratic formula. Okay? Round everything to the nearest hundredth place. What's that? Hundredths place. Hmm? Y'all need another minute, or do you want me to reveal the answers? All right, I'm going to do the great reveal. The great reveal. Okay, so I substituted my numbers in. When you do negative b, that's going to turn into positive 6 because in this example you have a double negative, plus or minus. Negative 6 quantity squared is positive 36, minus 4 times a times c. That's going to give you a positive 336 all over 8. If any part of that is incorrect, your answer is not going to work out right. So then I added what was under the radical to get 372. In my calculator, the square root of 372 was 19.287. I told y'all to round to the nearest hundredths place, which some of y'all rounded to your own place. I said hundredths place so that we all get the same answer. That should be 19.29 because hundredths place, 8's in the hundredths place. Look one place to the right. If that number is 5 or larger, then the number to the left goes up 1. So we should all have rounded to 19.29, right? So now I have x equals 6 plus or minus 19.29 divided by 8. Once we get to this point, I'm going to make 2 separate problems. One based on the positive square root and one based on the negative square root. So those 2 problems should look like this. And then I just simplified them both individually. And if we rounded to the same place, you should get approximately 3 1600ths as one of your solutions and negative 1 6600ths as your other solution. Questions on that? So I'm going to give you your assignment. Of course, I'm grading it on accuracy as I always do. Just going to be a couple problems. Just make sure you got it. Because again, we're going to be learning how to graph quadratics. And you got to be able to solve them so that you can graph them because you find 2 key points on your graph, the x-intercepts, by solving. Okay, so you have to know how to do this. Does anybody have questions on this example? All right, so I'm going to stop the video. I'll post these problems on Schoology. If you weren't here today, and I know you watched the video all the way to the end, I'll post the problems on Schoology, okay? I can leave that up while I'm working on stopping it, I suppose.